February 8th, 2023. Well, we've had to endure yet another Biden State of the Union speech, and I guess anything else you conclude from it, there doesn't seem to be a lot of hope for him agreeing on spending cuts, since the whole speech seemed to be largely focused on things to spend more money on that we aren't already spending enough on, according to him, or perhaps too much according to other people. But it's the usual kind of a thing, the appeal to somehow the tax system's unfair, and therefore the rich people aren't paying enough, even though more affluent people pay almost all the taxes anyhow, in terms of income taxes. And I would say, as far as the FICA taxes, well, that's for the benefit of basically lower and middle income people, because essentially, if the really rich could probably care less about their Social Security benefits. I mean, let's just say this: if somebody is, let's say, making $1 million a year or more, I don't think that's a big thing to that group of people. Um, if you're talking about the rich. Now, if you mean just people with a little bit more money than you have, let's say the affluent middle class, that's a whole different issue. They, of course, do care about Social Security. But you also understand that the benefits, for instance, are prorated. But then he throws out the big lie of all, that Republicans want to, cut Social Security and Medicare. And based on what? That's like the oldest lie there's been ever since there has been Social Security. I mean, it goes back to probably the FDR and Truman days. It's always been the big Democrat lie, right? That's the case. Yet when you look at some polling and you look at a breakdown of support for Republican candidates versus Democrats by age range, the 65 up group is much more of a Republican group. So why would the Republicans want to cut the benefits to the group that votes for them? If they did that, they would lose the senior vote, and they would definitely lose every election. So at any rate, so I just think that's another example of this rather crazy speech he made, to kind of get a little bit into what Sarah Huckabee Sanders had to say in her rebuttal. That this whole thing is rather a kind of a crazy speech, but nonetheless, um, I mean, the Chinese balloon flies over the U.S. and he thinks that Xi Jinping is somehow, feels like he'd rather be Biden than himself. I don't think so. This guy is really out there on a lot of issues. I mean, there's some things that might be true. The general idea, though, that you can, price control things into affordability is a little bit questionable. I mean, if there really is an area, something like, the insulin situation, and if companies really were dramatically gouging people on that issue along the line of thinking, well, they need it to stay alive and therefore they'll pay anything that we charge them, that might be an area where I can kind of have a little sympathy for what he's saying. But in general, the idea that you can just cut costs of drugs across the board in general, and that somehow that'll all be paid for, is ridiculous. I mean, it isn't like although pharmaceutical companies make fairly good profits as companies go, the fact of the matter is it's not so exorbitant that they can absorb any, price cut without doing something else. At a minimum, they would probably cut back on research or whatever. I mean, it's just not viable. Or they might just go out of the business of providing that specific thing if they couldn't make profit on it. So, these are the kind of mistakes. And then another thing I thought was really interesting about it was the fact that he goes into this idea that people that work at things like checkout clerks at fast foods or something are under some kind of non-compete agreements. And that's, of course, absurd. That's not at all the case. The non-compete agreements generally have to do with people in high-tech industries and high management positions that have large amounts of proprietary information. And the idea is that they'll give them the job in return for them not going to their competitor with that information. So that's kind of what that was all about. Other areas where he's completely off base is, for instance, his attack on the energy companies by saying that they're criticizing them for, reinvesting their profits in their own stock in order to, increase their shareholder value. but he's saying, well, they should have invested in more production. But he's ignoring the fact that he's actually holding up permits to actually produce more oil. And of course, he's also the one that ended the pipeline, which would have expedited oil coming into the country from Canada. So I mean, this is just more of his complete nonsense. And then he goes into other issues that I thought was really strange, where he's like talking about the idea that that it's absolutely horrifying that somebody, when stopped by the police at night, should keep their hands in plain sight on the steering wheel. Yeah, you should do that. It's not any particular group that needs to be concerned about that sort of thing, because I mean you don't want to. I mean, you just don't want to present a threatening situation that might induce a police officer to make a mistake. Obviously, the deaths in Memphis were completely inappropriate, wrong. They're criminal. I agree. They're charged with murder. I mean, I don't know that the federal government needs to come up with some vast police reform thing over it. What you need to do in the event if the police do something criminal is prosecute them if they really do something criminal, and I think in this case they did. And I've addressed that in a previous video, so I won't go into any more detail on that. But again, he's trying to use it to be a divisive issue, as you can see, as always. And well, that's the kind of attitude I have toward a lot of this speech. It's just the idea that that he doesn't want to negotiate on reducing spending at all. I mean, and the idea that he presents the idea that like inflation in food has ended. I don't think so. I think that inflation still exists. The overall inflation rate, when you take into account that certain fluctuations have probably is abating somewhat, I think, largely due to Fed policy and the like. But and then he looks at the issue of the fentanyl drug issue, and of course that's become a lot worse because of his border policies. I mean, he's saying that somehow we don't do whatever he wants on the border. I mean, what he did on the border has caused the problem. With over 5 million illegal immigrants coming in during the first 2 years of his administration. I mean, this is out of control mayhem. And of course, dealing with just processing all these illegal immigrants takes the border agents off the job of actually dealing with the drug smugglers. So it's another area where he's totally disingenuous. So anyhow, that's kind of my general report. I think it was a very, bad address, and the idea that things are looking better for the future. I mean, when you look at, he talks about education, yet the evidence is that in fact, test scores are going down. The actual educational performance is going down, and that schools are deliberately, lowering standards, probably to achieve his called equity goals, and so forth. So, at any rate, I think that that kind of gets into the whole issue of his speech, and when I think about it, as I think it was a kind of a disingenuous speech, basically. But anyhow, I thought I'd kind of go over it to give my reactions to it. I don't know how effective it will be ultimately. I know his approval ratings is down. Usually presidents get a bit of a bump after a speech, so we'll see. And it'll be interesting to see how Sarah Huckabee Sanders' response is received also. It certainly sounded pretty good to me. It hits the main points of what we really disagree with, and it shows a little bit about what she's trying to do at the state level, and other people like Governor Youngkin and DeSantis are doing in their states. So anyhow, so I'll be wrapping this up for now. Please give me a like if you like these videos, and of course, if you haven't subscribed, you can also do so. I'll of course be posting this on Rumble as well, and of course the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below, and so we'll be wrapping this up for now.